Everyone in the jewelry store turned their heads when Lena walked in that morning because she looked out of place in a place that shined like gold and smelled like money. Her dress was old and faded, and her shoes looked like they had walked 1,000 miles through rain and dust, and her hair was tied up in a messy knot that said she had more important things to do than impress strangers. The air was full of perfume and whispers, and everyone was looking at her as if she had stepped into the wrong world. Lena smiled even though she felt small inside because she was not there to show off. She was there for one reason. She wanted to find a small necklace for her anniversary with her husband. She walked slowly past the glass cases, full of diamonds that sparkled like little stars, and tried to ignore the way people stared at her clothes instead of her face. But it was not easy, because two women near the counter began to whisper and giggle, covering their mouths with their perfect manicured hands, and one of them said in a voice that carried across the room that dress looks like it came from a thrift store. Lena heard it. Of course she did, but she chose to act like she did not. Her eyes stayed soft and calm as she leaned over a case of necklaces that glittered under the bright lights. A young salesman wearing a black suit and an expensive watch walked toward her with a fake smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, in a tone that sounded polite. "But cold, these pieces might be a bit out of your range. Maybe you would like to see something from our discount section." The rich women laughed again behind her, and one said under her breath, "She probably cannot afford." Even that Lena felt a sting in her heart, but she did not move away. She looked at the salesman and said gently, "I just want to look for a gift." Her voice was soft, but there was something in it. Something quiet and confident, like she knew something that no one else in that room understood. The salesman sighed and nodded, trying not to look bored. He showed her a few small silver chains and waited for her to leave soon. But Lena did not leave. She looked around the store again, her eyes landing on a glass case near the back, where the light seemed to dance around a beautiful diamond necklace that sparkled brighter than all the others. For a moment she just stood there staring at it, her lips parting slightly as if she was remembering something. The women noticed and laughed again. "She wants to see that one, can you believe it?" One of them whispered loudly. Lena turned toward them and smiled a small, kind smile that made them stop laughing for just a second, because they did not expect kindness in return for cruelty. Then she turned back to the salesman and said calmly, "My husband will be joining me soon. Maybe he can help me choose." The room grew quiet for a moment as people exchanged glances. Someone at the back whispered, "Her husband must be a janitor or a driver, because who else would marry someone who looks like that?" Lena heard that too, but her eyes stayed warm like she was thinking of someone far away, someone who made her feel safe no matter how cruel the world became. The door of the store opened just then, and the soft sound of the bell filled the air. Every head turned automatically because something about the way Lena had said "my husband" had made them curious. A tall man walked in, wearing a plain gray suit that looked neat but not rich. He did not look like a man who belonged in a place where everything cost more than a car. But there was something about him, something strong and quiet that made people step aside without knowing why. Lena smiled when she saw him, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her face glow. She said softly, "Hi, dear. I'm just looking around for a necklace," and people around her almost laughed again because they thought this must be the poor husband she was talking about. The salesman sighed loudly as if this was a waste of his time and said to the man, "Sir, maybe you can help your wife find something simple. We have affordable pieces near the front of the store." But the man did not answer. He just looked around the room with calm, steady eyes that made the laughter fade a little. He walked closer to Lena and touched her shoulder gently, asking which one she liked. Lena pointed toward the necklace behind the glass, the one that had caught her eye. The salesman followed her gaze and almost laughed. He said nervously, "Sir, that piece is worth more than your entire store could dream of affording. It's $12 million. The room burst into quiet chuckles again. The same two women whispered, "He probably does not even have $12. Lena looked down, feeling her cheeks burn, but before she could say anything, her husband looked straight at the salesman and said softly but clearly, "We will take that one." The laughter stopped as if someone had pressed pause on the world. The salesman blinked, thinking he must have misheard, but the man's face was serious, his eyes steady. Lena looked up at him in surprise, her heart pounding. Everyone in the store stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. The woman who had been mocked for looking cheap was now standing beside a man who had just asked for a $12 million necklace without a hint of hesitation. And in that single moment, the whole room changed. The whispers died, the laughter faded, and every person in that store began to wonder, who exactly was this woman they had just mocked? The jewelry store became so quiet that even the ticking clock on the wall sounded loud as everyone turned their eyes toward the man who had just spoken with calm power. In his voice sang the words, "We will take that one," while the salesman stood frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard, because no one in their right mind would say such a thing so easily, especially not while wearing a plain gray suit that looked like it came from a small shop and not a designer. Lena looked at her husband with wide eyes, trying to understand if he was serious or if he was joking, but he simply nodded once and smiled at her, the kind of smile that said, "Trust me," without needing words. The salesman laughed nervously and said, "Sir, that necklace cost $12 million. Maybe you want to see something else, something smaller or more affordable." But the man just looked straight into his eyes and said again, "We will take that one," as if the number 12 million meant nothing at all. The women who had mocked Lena earlier began whispering faster, now their voices full of confusion and disbelief. One said, "Maybe he is pretending. Maybe he wants to impress." Another said, "He cannot even afford a car and he is talking about millions." But still, the man's calm made them nervous because there was no trace of fear or doubt on his face. Lena felt her hands shaking a little. She tried to speak, but her voice came out soft. "Daniel, are you sure?" she whispered, but he only smiled again and said quietly, "You liked it, didn't you? Then that's the one we will get for you." The salesman swallowed hard and said, "Sir, if you are serious, I will need your ID and payment method to confirm. But please know that this is not a joke. We take security very seriously. And if this is some kind of prank, we will have to call the police." Daniel did not even blink. He took out a black credit card that looked unlike any the salesman had seen before. Its edges were shiny and it had no visible numbers. The salesman's hands trembled as he took it. He turned to the manager, who had now come out from the office at the back. His face pale and confused, the manager looked at the card, then at Daniel, then at the necklace, and finally said, "Please wait here, sir. We will prepare it immediately." As they waited, the people around them started to murmur louder. One woman said, "I think I recognize him. Maybe I saw his face on a magazine." Another said, "No way, if he was rich, why would his wife dress like that?" Lena could hear every word, but she stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on her husband, who stood tall and calm as if none of this mattered. He turned to her and asked softly, "Do you remember our first anniversary, how we couldn't even afford a small cake?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, and he continued gently, "Well, I remember every single thing you did for me back then, how you worked late, how you believed in me when no one else did. This is my way of saying thank you." The salesman came back with the necklace in a velvet box, his hands shaking slightly. He placed it on the counter carefully. The diamonds sparkled under the light like 1,000 little suns. Daniel looked at Lena and said, "Go ahead, try it." She hesitated, her heart racing, afraid even to touch it, but he took her hand and guided it gently toward the box. She opened it and gasped softly, because up close it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The other customers were watching every move, every breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The manager whispered to an assistant to verify the card, and the assistant ran to the back room. Still, the store remained silent. No one dared to speak until finally the assistant returned, nodding quickly, whispering something into the manager's ear. The manager looked at Daniel with new respect and said softly, "Sir, the payment has been approved. Would you like the receipt emailed or printed?" A ripple of shock went through the room. One of the women dropped her shopping bag by accident. Another covered her mouth with her hand, unable to hide her surprise. Lena stood frozen, unable to believe it herself. She turned to her husband and said, "Daniel, why this much? This is too much." And he answered simply, "Because nothing is too much for you." The manager handed him the box carefully and said, "Thank you, sir. Please come again any time." Daniel nodded politely and placed the necklace around Lena's neck himself, his hands steady, his eyes full of warmth. The diamonds glittered against her skin, catching the light, and everyone in the room could not look away. One of the rich women whispered, "Maybe he is an actor. Maybe this is a movie scene." Another said quietly, "Or maybe he really is who he seems to be," but none of them truly knew the truth. Not yet. Lena looked up at Daniel, her eyes shiny with tears. She whispered, "I do not deserve this." He smiled and said, "Yes, you do more than anyone else. You deserve everything good in this world." He turned to the crowd and said in a calm voice, "You should never judge someone by their clothes or by what you think they can afford you. Never know their story. You never know who they really are inside." And with that, he took Lena's hand and walked toward the door while everyone watched in silence as if the air itself had stopped moving. The bell rang softly as they left, and the whispers began again behind them. But this time there was no laughter, only curiosity and wonder about the quiet man in the plain suit who had just bought a $12 million necklace without blinking once, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the woman they once mocked, and the mysterious husband who changed everything in a single moment. The moment Daniel and Lena stepped out of the jewelry store, the world seemed to stop for a heartbeat, as if time itself could not believe what had just happened inside that glittering room where laughter had turned into silence and disbelief had become awe. The soft sound of the glass doors closing behind them echoed like the end of a movie scene, but for them, it was only the beginning of something much bigger. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she touched the necklace that now rested around her neck. It was heavy and cold against her skin, and yet it felt warm because it was a gift, not of money, but of love. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes full of confusion and emotion, whispering, "Daniel, why did you do this?" And he smiled gently, brushing her hair away from her face, saying, "Because I wanted you to have something that shows what you mean to me." Behind them inside the store, the rich women still stood frozen, unable to move or speak. One of them muttered, "He really paid for it," while the other whispered, "How is that possible? Who are they?" The salesman was still staring at the receipt in disbelief, the numbers printed clearly. 12 million paid in full. The manager shook his head slowly, thinking he might never see anything like that again in his life. Outside, the air was cool and the city lights shimmered like diamonds themselves. People walking by turned their heads because the necklace around Lena's neck caught the light and sparkled with every step she took. She felt shy at first, wanting to hide it, but Daniel held her hand firmly as if telling her not to be afraid. As they walked down the street, Lena remembered the small jewelry shop they had gone to many years ago when they could only afford a silver ring. She had told him then that she did not need anything fancy, just love and time together, and now standing there with a necklace worth millions, she realized nothing had changed inside his heart. He was still the same man who cared more about her than about what people thought. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes soft and deep. He said, "Do you know why I chose that necklace?" She shook her head slowly, and he said, "Because when I saw it, I remembered the promise I made to you years ago that one day I would show the world what real value looks like. Not in gold, not in diamonds, but in loyalty and kindness." A small crowd had started to gather nearby, people whispering and pointing. Recognizing the couple from inside the store, someone took a picture. Another whispered, "That's the woman everyone mocked, and that's her husband, the one who bought the $12 million necklace." Lena heard them, but instead of feeling embarrassed, she felt something different, something strong and peaceful, because for the first time she realized that it did not matter what anyone thought anymore. Daniel noticed the way people were staring, but he did not seem bothered. He took out his phone and called their driver, telling him to bring the car around. Soon after, a black luxury car pulled up to the curb, and the driver quickly stepped out, opening the door for them. The same women from the store who had followed them outside gasped quietly, seeing the car's logo, realizing that this was no ordinary couple. Before getting in, Daniel looked back at them and said in a calm voice, "Never look down on someone because of how they look, because you never know the battles they fought or the hearts they carry. Then He helped Lena into the car and they drove away, leaving behind a group of people who would spend the rest of the day talking about what they had just seen. Inside the car, Lena sat quietly staring out the window, her reflection showing the sparkling necklace. She touched it gently and said, "Daniel, I don't even know what to say," and he answered softly, "You don't need to say anything. Just know that I meant every word when I said you deserve it." She turned to him, tears filling her eyes, saying, "You could have given me a small flower and I would still feel the same because it's not about this, it's about you and us." He smiled and said, "That's exactly why I did it, because I know you care more about love than money. And that's what makes you so rare." As the car moved through the streets, Daniel's phone buzzed with messages from business partners and friends who had already seen the photos online. People were sharing them faster than lightning, some praising his gesture, some questioning it, but he didn't care. All he cared about was the woman sitting beside him, the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing but dreams. When they reached home, Lena looked around their house, remembering how far they had come. It was not always like this. There had been nights when they ate bread and tea for dinner, nights when bills piled up, nights when she told him it would be okay, even when she wasn't sure herself now. Everything looked different, but the feeling of love and gratitude remained the same. Daniel walked over to her and said, "You remember how people used to laugh at us when we walked past fancy stores? How they said we didn't belong well today? I wanted to remind them that it's not the clothes that matter, it's the character." Lena smiled through her tears and said, "You didn't have to prove anything to anyone," but he shook his head, saying, "I didn't do it for them. I did it for you, for all those times you stood beside me when everyone else walked away." She hugged him tightly, the diamonds pressing softly against his chest as she whispered, "Thank you, my love." He kissed her forehead and said, "No, thank you for never giving up on me." Outside their window, the city lights kept shining, and somewhere far away people were still talking about the mysterious couple who bought the $12 million necklace. But inside their home there was only silence, warmth and love, the kind that money could never buy. The next morning, the news about the mysterious couple spread across the city like fire. People were talking in cafes, offices, and online. Everyone wanted to know who the woman was and why her husband had spent $12 million on a necklace for her. The story had turned into a storm of whispers and headlines: the woman who looked poor, the man who paid millions, the story no one could explain. Lena woke up to her phone buzzing with messages and calls from people she had not spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to talk now, but she ignored them all. She walked into the kitchen where Daniel was making coffee, his movements calm as if nothing in the world had changed. He looked at her and smiled, asking, "Did you sleep well?" She nodded slowly, sitting at the table, her mind full of questions. Daniel poured her a cup and said, "You look worried," and she answered quietly, "I just don't understand why you did all of this. Why such a big thing?" He leaned against the counter, his eyes soft, and said, "Because I wanted them to see what real love looks like, because they judged you without knowing your story. And I think it's time they finally learn who you really are." Lena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had worked so hard for so long, and she remembered everything. The small apartment they once lived in, the nights when the rain leaked through the roof, the time when they shared a single blanket in winter because they could not afford heating. She remembered how Daniel used to come home exhausted from 2 jobs, his clothes smelling like sweat and dust, but still smiling and saying, "We'll make it someday." They had met years ago in a small coffee shop. She had been working there as a waitress trying to pay her college fees, and Daniel was a struggling student with big dreams and no money. One day he left a small note on a napkin. It said, "I may not have much now, but I will one day make you the happiest woman in the world." She had kept that napkin folded in her wallet for years, and now it was still there, a little worn but full of memories. Daniel started a small business after college with nothing but determination and an old laptop. The first few years were hard, really hard. They lost money, they borrowed, they failed again, and again people laughed behind their backs. Some even told Lena to leave him and find someone more successful, but she never did. She stood beside him every step, believing that one day things would change. She worked extra shifts, sold her jewelry, and even skipped meals so they could pay the bills when Daniel felt like giving up. She reminded him why he started. When he doubted himself, she said, "You can do it. I know you can." And slowly, things began to change. His business started to grow. Clients came, deals happened, and soon the same people who had laughed at them started asking for his advice. Still, Lena never cared about showing off. She wore simple clothes, cooked simple meals, and lived quietly. She never told anyone about their wealth, not even her old friends. She said money is just paper. It does not define who we are, and Daniel loved her even more for that. He always said her heart was his real treasure, not the house or the cars or the success. That was why the moment in the jewelry store had meant so much to him. It was not about buying a necklace. It was about giving back what she had given him all these years. She had given him her faith, her patience, her strength when the world offered none. Now he wanted the world to see what true loyalty looked like. As they sat together in the kitchen, Daniel took her hand and said, "You remember the night before our first big deal when we were both scared that everything would fail? You held my hand and said, 'As long as we have each other, we can start again from zero.' I never forgot that, and I promised myself that when the time came, I would give you something so special that no one could ever laugh at you again." Tears filled Lena's eyes as she whispered, "Daniel, we don't need to prove anything." He smiled and said, "I know. But sometimes showing the world kindness wrapped in strength can change the way people think. Maybe someone out there will see our story and learn not to judge by appearances." Outside, the sun was shining and the sound of birds filled the morning air. Their home felt peaceful even though the world was buzzing with curiosity. Daniel's phone kept ringing. Reporters wanting interviews, magazines offering covers. He ignored them all, saying to Lena, "Let them talk. We don't owe anyone explanations." She smiled softly and said, "That's exactly why I love you." Later that day, they sat on the porch watching the sunset together. The necklace still sparkled faintly against her neck. Daniel reached over and touched it gently, saying, "I didn't buy it to show our wealth. I bought it to honor your heart, because when I had nothing, you gave me everything. And now when I have everything, I still want nothing but you." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You always find a way to make me cry." He laughed quietly, saying, "That's because every tear you shed reminds me how lucky I am to have you." The golden light of evening wrapped around them, and for a moment everything felt still. No cameras, no noise, just the two of them remembering how far they had come from the days of hunger and struggle to this moment of peace and love. The truth about their past was no longer something to hide. It was something to be proud of, because it had built the foundation of everything they were today. And as the last light faded behind the hills, Daniel whispered softly, "We made it together." The story of Lena and Daniel spread faster than anyone could imagine by the next morning. Their names were everywhere, on television, on social media, and in newspapers. People called them the couple of the year. Some praised their love, while others argued about whether it was real or just a show. But no matter what people said, the image of the simple woman wearing a $12 million necklace was impossible to forget. Reporters stood outside their gate trying to get a glimpse of them, cameras flashing every few minutes. Neighbors who once barely said hello now smiled too much, bringing flowers and gifts, pretending they had always admired her. Lena felt strange seeing how quickly the world changed. One moment they mocked her, the next they admired her, as if kindness and cruelty were just two sides of the same coin. Daniel told her not to worry. He said, "Let them talk. Love does not need approval." She nodded, but deep inside her heart she wondered how many people in the world were treated the same way. Judged too soon by how they looked, how they dressed, how they lived. She thought about all the faces she had seen in her life: the waitress ignored by customers, the cleaner no one thanked, the old lady laughed at in the market. And she wished she could tell them that one day things could change. A few days later, an online magazine released a long story about their past, showing old pictures of their small apartment, their first car, their wedding photo where Lena wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. People were touched by it. The comments were full of words like respect, goals, and true love. Hashtags started trending. People from around the world sent them messages saying their story gave them hope. But not everyone was kind. The same women who had laughed at Lena in the jewelry store were now trying to apologize. They posted pictures of themselves online with captions saying we should never judge a book by its cover. One of them even wrote a long letter begging for forgiveness, saying she had learned her lesson and would never mock anyone. Again, Lena saw the post, but she said nothing. She did not reply because she did not need to. She had already moved beyond their opinions. Daniel was invited to speak on a talk show about his success and his gesture for his wife when the host asked him why he had spent so much money. On a necklace, he smiled and said it was never about money, it was about meaning. And the audience clapped loudly. He continued saying, I wanted to show that love has no price tag. Real wealth is not measured in gold or cars or big houses. It is measured in loyalty, patience, and kindness. When you find someone who stands with you through the dark days, that person is worth more than all the diamonds in the world. His words went viral. People shared short clips of him online, writing captions like faithfulness is priceless and love like this still exists. One teacher even showed his interview to her students, telling them, this is what respect looks like. Lena watched it at home, tears in her eyes and her heart full of pride, because she knew he meant every word. That weekend, Daniel and Lena were invited to a charity gala, the same kind of event they used to only dream of attending. She wore a simple blue gown and the famous necklace around her neck shining under the lights when they entered the room. Everyone turned to look, not with laughter this time, but with admiration. People whispered softly, that's them. That's the couple from the story. A well-known businesswoman approached Lena and said, you have no idea how much your story has inspired women like me. I used to think success meant looking powerful. Now I see that real power is quiet. It's in love and forgiveness. Lena smiled politely and said, thank you. But the real credit goes to my husband, because he never gave up on us. The woman smiled and said, you are both lucky. During dinner, the host of the event asked Daniel to say a few words. He stood up, took the microphone and said softly, we live in a world where people judge fast and love slow. Maybe it's time to change that. I was once a man with nothing but a dream, and my wife was the one who believed in it. She gave up her comfort, her time, her peace for me. And I wanted the world to see that her value cannot be measured by clothes or brands. When I bought that necklace, I wasn't buying jewelry. I was buying back every sacrifice she made for me. The crowd clapped, some even stood, tears in their eyes. Lena sat there watching him, her heart swelling with pride, because this was not about fame. It was about truth, their truth, and now everyone could see it. After the event, they returned home together, the city lights flickering through the car window. Lena rested her head on his shoulder and said softly, Daniel, the world has changed so much since that day. He smiled and said, maybe, but we haven't changed. We are still us. That's all that matters. She nodded, closing her eyes, feeling peaceful for the first time in days. Outside, people were still talking about them, some saying it was the most beautiful story they had ever heard, others arguing that no one spends that much for love, but inside their quiet home none of that mattered. Daniel placed his arm around her, whispering, you see, my love, sometimes life gives you pain so you can learn to see the value of kindness, and sometimes it gives you wealth so you can use it to heal others, and that's the lesson everyone should learn. Lena smiled softly, the necklace glinting faintly under the light as she whispered, yes, maybe that's the real reason we went through everything, so that others could remember that love, not money, is what makes a person truly rich. Weeks passed after the charity event, but the story of Lena and Daniel did not fade. It continued to move hearts around the world. People still spoke about them as if they were a symbol of true love and quiet strength. Their photos were printed on magazine covers and their words were shared again and again online. But what no one knew was that the necklace itself carried a secret, one that Daniel had never told anyone, not even Lena. One evening, Daniel received an invitation to speak at a grand charity gala in the city. It was a special night organized to support young entrepreneurs and women in need. He agreed to attend, but this time he told Lena that he wanted her to come with him, not as a guest but as part of his story. She smiled, unsure of what he meant, but she trusted him as always. She wore the same blue gown she had worn before, simple yet graceful, and the famous necklace that still shined like 1,000 stars against her skin. When they entered the ballroom, everyone turned again. Whispers filled the air, but this time they were full of admiration and respect. The host welcomed them with warm words, calling them the couple who reminded the world that love was still real after dinner. Daniel was invited on stage and the lights dimmed, leaving only a soft golden glow around him. He looked at the crowd, smiled, and began to speak. His voice, calm, yet strong, said, "When people saw me buy this necklace, they thought it was a sign of wealth. They thought I wanted to show off what I had achieved. But the truth is very different." And the room fell silent. Every eye fixed on him. He continued, 12 years ago, when I was broke and hopeless, I wanted to start my first business, but I had nothing. No savings, no investors, no one who believed in me except one person. My wife Lena, the same woman you all saw walking into that store, the one who